Anyhow, so we got most of the wing infill done except for the wingtips and trailing edge and the flaps. So that's the next step here. Get this done, and then I can do the rough sanding, get the leading edge, trailing edge sanded to profile, cleaned up, sanded to profile, and then we'll be on to the bottom, getting this bottom radiused and made more into a wing airfoil shape. So anyway, I just wanted to briefly talk about that. And here you can see how I've got the I don't know if you can see this, how the flaps are going to just be hinged, and it's just a static hinge. On the actual P47, these are Fowler flaps, Fowler, and it's similar to what's on the DC3. I think the DC3 also has Fowler flaps, but what all that means is that the flaps don't just rotate down, but they extend back and then rotate down on the actual aircraft. Not a lot, but you know, enough to get more of the flaps lower surface into the slipstream and create more drag. I think it also, on the top half of the wing, extends the lift area. Instead of just pivoting in one spot, by extending and then pivoting, it extends the wing area and adds lift. So the idea behind the flaps is to add both lift and drag. That way, as you reduce airspeed, the aircraft needs less airspeed to continue flying. That's important when you're landing. You want to touch down, I think in this aircraft, somewhere around, I think it was 80 miles per hour, or whatever that is in knots. But the idea is to land at a low speed as possible. Now the P47 had a wide stance landing gear. So on the P47, the landing gear stance is about this wide in comparison to the overall wing and the center of both longitudinal and lateral gravity. So a much more stable landing anyway. You could land these at a fairly high speed if the flaps failed. With that wider gear, you'd be safe touching down. Something like a Spitfire, where the landing gear actually rotates from the center of the wing this way. It's such a narrow undercarriage that even at low speeds they had trouble. Pilots had to become very skilled at keeping the airplane from spinning, from ground looping, which is just hitting the landing area and then beginning to spin at a higher rate of speed than is safe. Anyway, all that aside, so these will not be Fowler flaps. I am just going to have them hinged in the one spot and just swing down and swing up. Okay, that's that. And then I want to go over the way I infill trailing edge. So, and I'm just going to do a talk about this. I'm not going to actually really show you here. I might, when I actually start working on this. I'm looking for a thicker piece of material. Alright, so this is the thickness of the material I typically use. It's 3/32, just under 1/8 of an inch thick. And the reason for that is, as I'm sanding into this wing, I don't want to be left with less than 1/16 of an inch of thickness at any of these joints or anywhere on the wing. The thicker the material you have there, the less likely you are to push your finger through it or punch holes in it, or it's just more durable. But when you get to a trailing edge like this, what happens is, if I were to insert this piece flat like this and start sanding on it to get that trailing edge profile, let me see if I can fit that. So there you can see that I could make it flush at the front when I glued it in. I should probably cut a piece for this, but so let's say we insert it there, we're flush there at the front, but back here, most of the thickness of this piece of infill is going to be sanded away. I mean, leaving us with maybe a 32nd of an inch here at the very back edge of the, right there. I mean, we'd be sanding almost all of this material away, and that would leave this less than paper thick right at the trailing edge where it's vulnerable to being cracked or broken by pressure. So what I do instead is, and then maybe I can demonstrate it better with this. So what I would do is take a piece that I'm going to infill at the back here and just slice away the underside to a wedge shape, and then that would lay against the trailing edge that I have here, and at that point we wouldn't be sanding very much material off at all, and we end up with a much thicker trailing edge infill right here at the back of the trailing edge of the wing. So again, what I'm talking about is taking a knife, taking the X-Acto blade to the piece of infill where we're going to use at the back here, and I'll just cut this and show you. So we'd want to chamfer this back edge. So what I would do is just take a blade and carefully just chamfer that along this back edge. And then that's where the part would rest against the top of the trailing edge of the wing. This area back here, this trailing edge. So I'd cut it to a chamfer, and then I'd sand it a little bit like so. Just a little, not a lot. Now when we go to infill this area, you can see that when the front is attached properly, and again this is very rough, I don't know if I'll be able to show you here, without, well, let's try it over here. So we're flush at the front of our opening, and here at the back now you can see this is much closer at the trailing edge to the top of the wing rib, so much less sanding there, and this is our net thickness here. Much better than if we did it the other way, laid it in there flat and then sanded it and sanded and sanded it, sanded away most of the material on the back end to get that flush look that we need at the back of the at the trailing edge. So you can see how just chamfering it a little bit like that can cause it to lie flat and be flush to the trailing edge of the wing. So that's how I would do all these parts, and I'll probably start working on that with the camera on. But we're getting close now to having the wing ready for sanding. Once the trailing edge and the wing tips are done, I'll start doing all the roughest sanding, the shaping of the wing with the sandpaper. And then we'll regroup on camera after that initial rough pass is done. So at that point, when the rough sanding is done and the leading and trailing edges are shaped, this underside is curved and so forth, I'll be able to start looking at the landing gear, working out all the geometry of all the pieces and parts that are going to go into landing gear legs, doors, and the fitting to the overlay that's going to go, the combing, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, the fairing that's going to go over this opening. And all those pieces and parts just have to line up correctly such that the landing gear retracts in there flush. And we'll just see if I can pull that off. And then once that's done, I'll probably get all that set up without glue, pull everything off till we're just back to this, and then start doing the filler and just laying in the spackle and sanding. But I have to get the landing gear functioning first, and so then I can then button these up. I have to get the landing gear locks to work and interact with the landing gear legs, these cores, the piano wire, such that the gear will lock in both the up and down position. So it's going to take a little work to get that done too. Right, so infill, rough sanding, dealing with the landing gear functionality, buttoning up the openings that I have here, getting the flaps installed, and then moving on to prep for paint, which includes spackling and sanding. Get this wing nice and smooth. We want it to look like aluminum clad wing structure, just as on the original, on the prototype P47. Okay, and then big picture stuff. Once the wing is ready to install, I'll want to get the tail feathers figured out, get those assembled and fabricated and stuck on the airplane. I like to have those on before I put the wing on. I can square those up to the fuselage with a couple of jigs, and then off of that alignment, that's what helps me to align the wing to the fuselage. And I don't have to make a fancy jig. I just have to make sure that the wing is square to the tail feathers and to the fuselage. And that's when this comes into play, or other 90-degree reference lines. You know, here I used the wall studs in the shed to help me align everything. Those are all 90-degree angles. So anyway, there's just you know, a few steps here. But as you can see, the wing is beginning to take on its shape and become a wing, and that's a good thing. That moves us closer to the. It didn't really take all that, you know, long to get to this point after I started to just sit here and pick up the work. So we're going to take our time. We're going to build up the airplane properly. I'm going to make the components look as true to the original as I can. We want the aircraft to look like a World War II era P-47 active duty aircraft. You know, we'll get the aviator painted up, we'll get this fellow sorted out, cleaned up as far as the sanding on him goes. These edges that are a little rough yet. That was loose. So just these little seams, we want to make sure we disappear those. These little areas where the two halves were joined together and that is visible, we want to make that invisible. You know, so there's a ton of work yet to do on this kit, on this project, and we're gonna do it right. We're gonna take our time and get her done, and you know, for the channel, I'm gonna try and make sure that I get as much of it documented with the camera as I can, and that's the purpose of this discussion here. So I'm going to straighten up the desk, move things around, get things in order here, so that I have space to cut this sheet up into the smaller sections that I need it in, so that I can do the rest of the covering. The flaps will be covered in here and along the back edge. These openings will not be covered, but they will be painted in the interior green, the zinc chromate green color. That interior surfaces on these warbirds were painted in, just as will eventually when I fabricate the inserts for the wheel wells themselves to detail them up. All that'll be done in interior green, but that's a long way off. So there you can see where we're at on progress. This is a progress report and discussion of next step. So finish the infill on the wing, and then I'll finish the infill on the wing. We'll do some of the trailing edge pieces on camera so you can see what I'm talking about, what I just sort of demonstrated roughly there, how that goes into practice. And then the shaping and sanding, and I'll do progress videos on that, just show you what the process is, how we're going to attain those shapes and get this thing sanded up properly. We'll test fit it into the fuselage a few times, make sure that it's going to line up and fit in there right. I also need to check, it's too late to do anything about it, but we want to make sure we have nice dihedral. I did use a little bit less than the plan specified, but the plan is set up for flying models, and I used a little bit less dihedral on that, but I think this is going to be right. Once all these edges at the leading edge are sanded to correct profile, the dihedral should look better than maybe it does now. But anyway, you'll see what I mean when final sanding on this. But that's where we're at. And so thanks for viewing. I'll post this video and we'll move on. Have a great day.